we hop on the live stream talking about a topic or a couple Bible verses, and then we jump into prayer requests and a question. So if you have any questions, let me know where you're watching from. Let me know if you have any questions, and then also if you have any prayer requests, we'll jump into them. Right now, we're basically going verse by verse. We're going through the Bible, starting in Genesis, and I don't know as long as we can. And so we're in Genesis 2. So some of this is commentary from David Guzik and some other sources as well. And then a lot of it is some information that I've learned over the years. And let's just jump right into it. Genesis 2, 24 through 25. Actually, before I do this, real quick, yesterday we had a couple of things. It was, we went through Genesis 2, God creating the man and the woman. And there was a comment. It was, what does God mean when he say the woman is the weaker vessel? And just real plainly, real quick, the only thing that I actually did a little bit of research trying to look it up. The only way that we see that she's weaker is just kind of in general the body. So, and you look at this is why there's this big issue with biological males being with biological females, because in general, overwhelmingly, is men are typically stronger as far as vessels. Now, it's interesting because it says weaker vessel, meaning that we're both weak. So the moment that we look at them and say, oh, I'm strong and she is weak. She is, no. We're both weak. We're all weak. We have weaknesses. It's interesting that people that are so strong and so mighty and so powerful can get taken out with one bad decision of, cholesterol, things like that. So I feel like we judge so much that we're so strong, when in reality, like, man, you've seen some of the biggest athletes get taken out because of a twist and a hernia. Like, it's nuts. So don't start thinking, men, that just because you're the stronger vessel, you're still weak. We're still weak. We still must rely on Christ. So anyway, we talked about that yesterday as far as what does it mean when we say women are the weaker vessel. And that does not mean that she's inferior in any way, shape, or form. It's just a natural commentary on the fact that men are supposed to be stronger and physically not, women are slightly weaker as far as the vessel, but it's not that they're any worse. It's not that they're any inferior. It's just a fact of life. This is why men and women do not compete in sports together, because typically men have the biological advantage. This is why there's so much uproar of biological males competing with biological females. It's not designed that way. And because it is designed that way, men are we're supposed to be laying our lives down. We're supposed to be protecting our women. There's old school manners that have like men walking on the side of the road next to the street, and men carrying groceries and things like that. They can, right? And there's so many things. We talked about that yesterday, so I'm not going to get into it. But it's the idea of you honor her as that vessel. You don't make her do all that hard, crazy work and labor because you were designed to do it. So you honor her and recognize that you are supposed to take a lot of that on yourself. So anyway, I know we didn't really touch on that yesterday. The weaker vessel kind of thing. It's not necessarily a better thing. You can see as a stronger and weaker light as far as the sun and the moon. Both are important. You cannot have the earth without the moon. The moon is just as important as the sun. It needs to revolve around. There's so many things that have that, even though we look at it differently. So it's not like she's terrible or she's inferior or the man is whatever. No, like if you're reading it like that, you're reading it wrong. So I'm sorry we didn't get into that yesterday because it was we were talking about. We see Every here today. Hey, I finally got into your live stream. I kept falling asleep. Hey Every, good morning. Thanks so much. Yeah, usually we don't do them on these days. Usually it's Monday, Tuesday, Friday, Saturday, but I'm working crazy overtime. It's been nuts. Just really trying to work hard. So I'm popping on here a little bit before that. Thanks so much. Welcome. Good morning. Scott Disney Vlog says, Joshua, Scott, say, Scott, what's up, man? I just saw a post you did about your wedding a little while ago. Hey, man. Yeah, doing these little live streams. You can probably see the past ones. We talked a little bit through Genesis. Scott's a good friend of mine. So some of you guys don't know. You don't know a lot about my personal life. I used to work for the Walt Disney Company, and Scott used to be one of my co-workers. We used to work out there together. So it's been a long time. We are not the same guys that we were back then. That's for sure. So great guy, wonderful guy. I don't know if you're still doing the Disney vlogs and stuff, dude. Check his page out, check his stuff out. Real neat guy. So like I said, we're just going through the verse. So sorry I didn't get to that message yesterday. So we're going to knock out Genesis 2, 24 through 25. This is talking about the marriage of Adam and Eve. If you want to see verse by verse, check out our other videos over the past couple weeks. So let's go ahead and knock this out. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. They were both naked, and the man and his wife were not ashamed. If funny fact, at our wedding, our pastor decided to say this verse, and we giggled at the naked part. Anyway, so they shall become one flesh. So this is the idea of oneness, right? Oneness. They shall become one flesh. When I read this, I see it's not like, oh, you're gonna get married and boom, you're one, you're oneness. Like you totally get it. It's perfect. No, like you're gonna be working on it over time. And people, I remember my grandpa talked to me before I got married. He says, people change. You're going to change together when you get married. And it's beautiful. And so you will be changing together. You will be going into oneness. We talked about the purpose of marriage yesterday and things like that. A man and wife can truly come together in a one flesh relationship, but they must be joined in a spiritual element. So this is a spiritual fact. The benefits of oneness are not gained by accident or by chance. So when we talk about they shall become one flesh, this passage forms the foundations of the biblical understanding of marriage and family, which we talked about before. Jesus in Matthew 9:15 and Paul in Ephesians 3:5-31 reference it to marriage. So this verse has been referenced a couple times. So the institution of monogamous home and family is a basic medium for the propaganda of the human propagation, of the human race and the training of the young. So it's common in history that people seldom pause to reflect how or why such a custom came into being, because it's so common, like throughout multiple cultures. Not that there's not outside of that, right? Many want to believe the monogamous two-parent family was invented in the 1950s by American television icons Ozzie and Harriet, but Adam and Eve are the original family. This is God's ideal family. It's not polygamy. It's not having a concubine. It's not keeping a mistress. It's not adultery. It's not any sort of alternate lifestyle. It's not homosexuality. It's not cohabitation. It's not promiscuity. It's not living together outside the marriage bond. It's not serial marriage. This is God's ideal. I know I'm going to get canceled for some of those. This is God's ideal for the family. And even when we don't live up to it, it's still important and set forth as God's ideal. And people argue, well, what about polygamy? Listen, every single situation in the Bible that had to do with multiple wives or concubines or whatever it was, any of those examples, they all ended terribly and horribly. And when Christ affirms it, he affirms what it is. I've heard so many arguments. We can get into that. If you want to have it, we'll have the conversation. If that's something that you want to talk about, put the question, let me know where you're watching from, and we'll jump into it. But this is God's design. And so when I talk about it, I've done some marriages before. I don't just do marriages to do marriages. I do Christian biblical covenants. So it's one man, one woman who love God and love each other and understand they're going to give their lives up for each other. It's a for life. We talked about that before. Somebody came to one of the pastors I follow and they said, hey, we want to get married, but we have a prenup and we're basically planning on divorcing in about 10 years. And he was like, I'm not doing your wedding because it's for life. So there's different things here that we talk about. And this one flesh, we think about it as like, come on, younger ears, close your ears, but you're probably not watching, is like sexual union. That's kind of what we think about. And it definitely is part of it, but it's not all of it. We have to understand this oneness extends beyond just kind of this sexual concept of it. Paul makes it clear that the sexual union has one flesh implications, even when we don't intend it to. So here's what we're talking about. And people have talked about this, and maybe people on this stream have talked about it. So that one flesh thing, when you become one flesh, it has implications whether you want it to or not. Listen, speculation nation here for a second. That's why we hear people talk about soul ties and things like that. You create a bond, and we hear this because 1 Corinthians 6:16. Or do you know that he who is joined to a harlot has one body with her, for the two shall become one. It's very serious. This is why God has reasons for saying what he says. I don't know exactly all the details with soul ties and like that, but when you become one flesh, you absolutely can make a connection, and there's things there that's just that you are now entwined with. That's why don't disobey God, because now you're going to have issues later. Even we talk about different things about honoring and doing different things. God's saying these things for our own benefits. That when you become one, when people have multiple partners, there's something in the spirit realm you might not be able to see. You might not. but understand there's some sort of connection of one flesh that you are basically permitting yourself to be part of, that then now in the spirit realm, you have a whole another level of things like that. But it's designed to be that way because you're supposed to do it in a marriage covenant. You're supposed to create that connection in a marriage covenant. That's part of the reason why we do the one flesh thing. That's why it is partly sexual, but it's not just for gratification. It's to create a bond, to bond with your spouse. And having that in mind, understand it's a much more important thing than just a benefit to yourself. And that's why there is no such thing as casual sex. I know you guys probably didn't want that in the morning. It's not a thing. It's not a thing, because when you become one flesh, something in the spirit connects and bonds you. It is not good for you to be doing these. It's not good to have these implications, because every sexual relationship at least begins with a one flesh bond, and the bond will either be something beautiful, right, like the beautiful dancing of like Fred Astaire or whatever, or because something distorted. And so it's either going to be something beautiful where you guys are in harmony in a marriage, a covenant, loving God, loving others, or it's going to be some sort of like mutated like combination that it's hard to get rid of. It depends on whether the bonding takes place in a relationship or the right conditions. Committed love, right? This is what I said. It has to be in committed love demonstrated by the marriage covenant, not just, oh, we're going to get married one day, or we're pretty much like married, or we're living together. Like all this, it's not God's plan. It's not. And a pursuit of true intimacy with each other and with God. Just because sex is taking place in marriage doesn't mean it's truly fulfilling God's purpose of bonding one flesh. We talked about this. There's a lot of commentary on this. Is what's the purpose of sex? Some people believe that different things. I believe there's multiple purposes of it within a marriage covenant. One is to procreate, of course. One is to enjoy, and then the other is to create bonds. I think those are kind of the three main purposes. But all those are within a marriage covenant. None of those need to be outside of a marriage covenant. And they shall become one flesh. The initial bond of one flesh relationship can be formed, like I said, and it's formed with the very first one. So, and then so I remember we were with, so you guys probably don't know a lot of our history, but my wife and I were actually part of gosh, I don't even know how to say it without being terrible to say it badly. A very controlling cult-like environment. We'll just say that. And basically what happened is everyone lived with everybody and everyone submitted in unhealthy ways. And so there was a level where we came from, and some of you guys might have, where it's unhealthy. It says leave and cleave. Leave your father and mother and become one flesh, right? So because you're supposed to leave your parents and become independent. I think the best example of this is a Boy Meets World episode. Has anybody watched Boy Meets World? If I could figure out what it was. But basically, the boy left home and married his wife, and he kept asking his dad to, like, hey, sign off on buying this house for us. Hey, come do this, come fix this, come this. And the dad every time said no. And the son got really mad. He's like, you're not being a good dad anymore. I'm so frustrated not helping. And what he was trying to say, it's shown is, son, you said you are in your own family. You are a man now. I have to let you be a man. Otherwise, I'd be doing you a disservice. And so we are meant to be not completely independent. Understand, we need people. We need people to help us. I'm not saying it's wrong for parents to help their kids. I'm not saying that. But in that context, he needed, at least within those first couple of years, to struggle together, to build those memories, to have kind of the junky apartment, right? To build and work your way up, to have things break, to learn that he can fix things, and all these things that men and women really need to do in those relationships. And that is healthy. It's not unhealthy. Now the alternative was where we were in this environment where, like, we basically left our parents just to be joined to this environment, and that was not healthy. But the true healthy is, I believe, somewhere in the middle, where the parents are available for emergencies and there's people who can help here and there, but it's mostly you, and not that you run and jump to someone to help every single time. So it's really the true balance is somewhere in the middle. And I think a lot of parents, and I know it's going to be difficult for us when our kids get old enough, is really letting go, letting the kids be kids, letting them kind of like navigate this stuff without us intervening. They need that. We owe it to them to do it. My son needs to be a man and tackle some of these things on their own. And sometimes we're going to say, hey, you have to sort of work this out. And that's going to be probably hard for us. But on the flip side, don't not help your kids if they really need it. You know what I mean? So, like, I can't tell you exactly where that is, but it's a leave and cleave. It's becoming one flesh. It's very important within I see a question there. I'm going to get to it in just a second. I'll finish this out, and then we're good to go with the questions. Let me know where you're watching from. Let me know if you have questions, prayer requests. We'll jump to them. So real quick, this is the last one. Um, they were both naked, the man and wife, and they were not ashamed. And so awesome, they were naked. The nakedness is far more than like nudity. It's the sense of being totally open and exposed to both God and man. We see this. This is a comparison. We see it all the time. Um, we understand that in this context, they were naked and unashamed. If they were open with everything without sin, they'd be unashamed, in everything. You have no sin. You have nothing to be ashamed of, nothing to hide. Adam and Eve knew that they were physically naked, nude before the fall. But what they did not know was a sinful fallen condition because they were not in that condition before the rebellion, which is interesting. We often feel uncomfortable when someone stares at us. This is because we've associated staring with prying, and we don't want people to pry into our lives. We want to remain hidden and only reveal ourselves to people that we want to reveal ourselves to. Isn't that interesting? And this is the last thing. When we want to be most attracted to somebody else, we do the most to change our normal appearance. Look at this. Look at this. When most people that I know, if they want to look attractive, what do? They figure out the clothing that basically boosters things. They put the makeup on to emphasize things. A lot of times I've seen people like, oh my gosh, like you look totally different. Like what happened to you? Like, you cleaned up nice, right? You do things to boost or change your appearance, which is just crazy. We must have the thought, if I really want to impress the person, I have to fix myself up. That's the thought. But none of that feeling was with Adam and Eve. They were just there, boom, naked and not ashamed. That's the end of chapter 2. I got some comments in the section. So Dysophysist says, what I think of Matthew 16, 17 through 19 and John 21, 15 through 19. Thanks so much. And thanks so much for watching. I have 1 minute, so I don't know if I'm going to get to that one. Marco A. Monte says, hi, bud. It's been a while. Hey, good morning. Thanks so much. Thanks for joining us, Marco. Thanks for Every and Scott and everybody who's joining us here. You know what? I will real quickly look at that verse. I will see if that's something I can answer in just a minute. If not, I might have to jump to... All right, let's look at this verse. If you could post the verses, that would be great. That way I don't have to Google it. And let me know if you're still watching, so I know you're going to benefit from whatever we're going to look at it. Matthew 16, 17 through 19. All right, so Matthew 16, 17 through 19 says, and Jesus replied, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. And I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bound on earth will be bound, and whatever you bound on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose will be loosed in heaven. Okay. Do you have a comment specifically on that? We've been given the keys of the kingdom. That talks about when Jesus descended into hell and got the keys up. He talks about, I will tell you that Peter, there's concepts. Basically what happens is he's basically saying, like, you are the Christ, you are the Son of God. He talks about things like that. And from that is basically the foundation of Christian principles. We understand that is basically the concept that let's see, here it is. There it is. Matthew 16 says, so it's the whole question. It says, who do you say that I am? They go through, and Peter says, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And then Jesus says, yep, this is the rock that I'm going to build my church. People look to it and say, this Peter is the Pope and stuff like that. In order to do that, you would have to read into it and add a lot of commentary and thoughts. I don't know. He clearly was a leader in the beginning church, clearly was possibly the leader, things like that. There's a lot of arguments behind that. I'm not going to get into that, but I know that it's the rock that is building the church on is the truth of God, because we know he is the chief cornerstone. Jesus is the chief cornerstone. If you're talking about building a church, he's the cornerstone. So why would any other cornerstone be the cornerstone, even if Peter's considered a rock? So let me look real quick. I don't know. Sometimes that's I'm not, if you believe that Peter is Peter and the successor of the Pope and stuff, that's fine. That's cool. I don't have any issue with that. The only issue with papacy is infallibility. I'm cool with you having a leader. I'm cool with you following a guy. I'm cool with you having, insight from somebody who is spiritually, mature and stuff like that. It's just a matter of when you elevate what they say to equal to scripture, that's where it kind of comes a little crazy. John 21, 15 through 19. Well, let's get the whole context, though, because I think that was important for the last one, too. So, all right. So when they finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, Son of John, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he said. Do you know that I love you? Jesus said, yes, feed my lambs. Again, Jesus said, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? He answered, yes, Lord. Do you know that I love you? Jesus said, take care of my sheep. The third time said to them, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? And Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, do you love me? And he said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. And Jesus said, feed my sheep. How far did you want me to go? Through 19. Truly, truly, I tell you, when you were younger, adjust yourself where you would wanted, and when you're older, you'll stretch out your hands. Someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. Jesus said this indicates the type of death that which Peter would glorify God. He said to him, follow me. So real quick, the whole thing with that, Peter, like I said, Peter is definitely one of the leaders, not the leader of the early church. Basically, he denied Jesus 3 times. Jesus is sort of reinstating him 3 times. So I don't know him, I don't know him, I don't know him. And then he says, I love you, I love you, I love you. And Jesus says, feed my sheep, feed my sheep, feed my sheep. So it's the 3, it's redemption. It's really cool. And then, of course, a Christian tradition says that Peter was crucified on the cross. I believe he was crucified upside down. So Jesus is referencing that, hey, like this walk with me, this walk in my will is going to result in your crucifixion as well. So I hope that answered, was that answer the question about why Peter and not anyone else? That's a good question. So if you look at the disciples, I think there's some good estimates. There's at least 70 or so disciples that we know of, and then there was a smaller group of 12, and there was a smaller group of 3, and there was a smaller group of 1. And that's just kind of how it is. You look in the Old Testament, same thing. You've got Moses, and then you've got like kind of the elders, and then another group of elders, and then it expands. It's just how God does it. That's why I have no issue with churches having, head pastors or things like that. That's why, like I said, I have no issue with the Pope making some decisions and stuff like that. I don't, because I understand that there's leadership hierarchies and stuff like that, and I think God has designed those. So why Peter, nobody else? That's a good question. I don't know if I would have picked Peter because like how hot-headed he was. Plus, by the way, but understand that even if Peter was the leader of the beginning church, even if Peter was the high top guy, he still submitted to Paul when they had an excuse. And we understand that Peter still made mistakes. He was not infallible. No, he was not. So understand that if Peter is the example, he was not infallible. He was making people get circumcised and follow all these Jewish traditions and stuff like that we weren't supposed to do. They're putting them back under the curse of the law. But if you look in Galatians, there was a big back and forth. I'm all for people saying, Peter was the first leader of the church after Jesus, and then there was a succession. That's fine. I think it's a weak argument, but that's fine if you believe that. But the argument is he was never infallible. Peter was never infallible. So none of these guys are infallible. And they were all susceptible to being wrong. And they all received correction when it was given. And they all humbled themselves to receive that correction. So why Peter? I don't know why Peter. But then again, I don't know why he picked me either. You know what I mean? You probably don't know why you picked you. Looking at ourselves, realizing how, whatever we are, just trusting, just like, dang, like, why any of us, right? I think the reason why Peter is because Peter would do things. Peter would get things wrong, but he would at least he would go. And I think that's what God honors is faith. Even if your faith is off a little bit, I think he'd rather you be in faith, moving, and get it wrong than stuck in like an easy chair. There's an old saying that says, God will pick you up out of the deepest, darkest pit, but he won't pick you up out of an easy chair. It says even God won't steer a parked car. So we got to be going. And I think that's what was in Peter and Paul, which is why they were some of the greatest leaders within the early church. So I hope that answers that question. Heather H says, hey, when Cain killed Abel, then Abel said he was afraid to be sent out, that he would be killed. Where did other people come from? Hey, Heather, thanks so much for watching. I guess we'll answer this one real quick. Pop off. And Heather, let me know if you're still watching. So the short answer to that is the only lineage we know from Adam and Eve is their specific sons and those sons. That's it. And back in the old days, we typically knew nothing about the women. So it'd be like, I'm trying to think of any example, but it's like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Okay, well, we know Abraham, Isaac, Jacob all had a bunch more brothers and sisters, right? And so, but we don't talk about them. So same thing within the New Testament. If Adam and Eve, especially if the environment was different back then and people lived to be much longer and you have all these factors in and they were naked and unashamed, like we said, and like check out my other thing in Genesis. And the mandate, remember, the command that God gave Adam and Eve back in Genesis 1:26 through 28 says to be subdue the earth and be fruitful and multiply. So if they took that serious, they would be sending their kids out throughout all the earth and being fruitful and multiplying their family. So by the time that Cain and Abel did that, we don't know how old they are. They could have been 200, 400, 500 years. Who knows? Or who knows how old they were? But how we don't know how many babies they had, how many women they had, how many men they have, all this stuff. So I think it's perfectly reasonable to believe that if Adam and Eve were commanded by God to go throughout the whole earth and populate it, that they would be populating the whole earth. So by the time that Cain goes out to wherever he goes out to, along the way there and even further, there's probably tons and tons of people. There is a theory that there were already people there. I think that you could make that argument, but the Bible doesn't talk about that. Same thing like dinosaurs, aliens, all this stuff that you could go off on rabbit trails. Based off what we know, I mean, it's possible, but based off what we know, I think the most likely answer is when Adam and Eve heard that they need to go into all the earth, subdue the whole earth, and be fruitful and multiply. That's exactly what they were doing. So by the time Cain got over there, they went to a place that was already there of his of humans that were populated from Adam and Eve. So I think that's the most logical argument in my mind. Why Peter? Yes, San says, I think this live is only for Christians. No, this live is for anyone. As we talked about this before, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. God loves everyone. God extends salvation to everyone. God welcomes questions and comments and says just to work with him and to talk to him. So Hev says Peter was a fire. Yeah, Peter was fire. Lance Freeman says Peter's my favorite. Yeah, I actually really like Peter. Peter's one of my favorite names. I have some socks with Peter on it. I love his zealousness, even though he gets it because, like, I would say, actually, we have a painting in our house. Peter falling in the water. So I love Peter. Yep. Disso physicist, and thanks so much for those questions. And everybody says yes, I agree. He's infallible. It says the doctor that teaches infallible. Anything else? Well, we don't really know what he teaches, and so I don't think so. I don't think so because look, go in Galatians. There's a part where Peter was clearly sending people on the wrong path, making them abide by the law, which if you're under the law, you're under a curse. Paul talks about that. You're free in Christ. You're not under the law. There's so many things like that. So Peter's doctrine was clearly wrong. He was rebuked. So if he could not be infallible if he was getting things wrong. You understand what I'm saying? It's like a prophet. A prophet must be 100% accurate in the Old Testament or they get stoned. That's how serious it is. No one is infallible except for Jesus, right? Now, if you have the writings within Scripture, those are inspired. So what Paul wrote in the writings is infallible. What Peter wrote in in 1st, 2nd Peter is infallible. But outside of that, the other things, it's kind of like perfect example is in Jude, where it references the book of Jasher or Enoch, or you have these guys who reference secular people within their writings. Paul references secular terms. Peter and Paul and these writers are not affirming that everything these guys say are infallible. They're not even saying, hey, everything I say is infallible. No, but what they're saying is in this context, in this letter, what I'm saying is God breathed. We actually know this. There's a whole thing where when they refer to the Bible, the inspired words, they refer to the letters they're actually looking at then, which is in the New Testament, which is a cool thing. So that's my thought on this. I don't think there's any argument for Peter being infallible at all. I think the argument is the opposite way. And so if Peter's not infallible, ain't nobody infallible. So there we go. And not so much not infallible. He literally is rebuked to some of the harshest degrees. Go read Galatians. Read the argument. So that's my thought. And I love Peter. I love Peter, by the way. Lance Freeman says, I relate a lot to Simon Peter. Yep. Sure, he's very important. I think he's super duper important. I love Peter. Peter's my guy. Who the heck is Pete? Peter is one of the disciples. He's what many regard as the main leader of the early church, and kind of the main guy back in the day. And a lot of people will say that he's sort of where the papacy comes from. I'm not a big proponent of that, but I feel like you could make a decent argument for that. But anyway, so yeah, Simon Peter. I believe the book of Enoch to 100% being in the Bible. So my thing is so the book of Enoch, so I've read a lot of the apocryphal books, most of the apocryphal books. When you look at those books, even the book of Maccabees and stuff like that, it's really obvious why they're not in the Bible. It'd be like, name somebody who's controversial. I don't know, like Joel Osteen or Benny Hinn or John MacArthur or, I don't know, name any of these guys. when I read these books, like Enoch, Jasher, all this stuff, I read them as if they're written by those guys, Billy Graham. It may be a great person of God, somebody who understands, but they're not infallible. It's not the living, breathing word of God. And if you look at it, back in the day, Martin Luther, the Reformation, all that stuff, the original New Testament canon, we actually have it. I believe there's a copy of it from like I mean, we have copies in like 300 ADs. We have full copies of it, and there were copies of 66 canon. So we recognize that canon, and somehow they were like, oh, these are these other books. But before I get into that, we have a whole thing on how the Bible was inspired and why we chose the books that we did. I'm okay with people, and I think it's good because even Martin Luther, when he said, hey, this is the canon, 66 books, these are inspired. The reason why he chose not to include the other books he has many reasons. There's contradictions, there's issues, there's doctrinal issues. It just doesn't line up. You see in the book of, I believe, in the extra books the Catholics, the Orthodox recognize, there's like sorcery, there's witchcraft, there's Raphael lying, there's all these things that angels don't lie. Like there's all these things in there that just don't compute. So with the book of Enoch, same thing is most of all, yeah, read it, learn from it. Martin Luther says, read these books, learn from them, but they're not authoritative in the same way that the scripture is. So I don't have any problem with people, especially if you're more mature in your faith, to read the book of Enoch and stuff like that. But understand, read it with a grain of salt. Don't read it like it's God's word. Read it like it's, your favorite pastor or like somebody you don't like. Maybe read it skeptically. Maybe that's better. Maybe if you don't like Stephen Furtick, read it like Stephen Furtick wrote it, where you understand you're both reading the same Bible, but maybe you disagree with stuff. Or Benny Hinn, or any of these guys. I don't know. I'm not throwing shade at any of these pastors and stuff like that. Bless them, but read it skeptically. So that's why I believe we don't have it in our scripture, because there's a couple issues in there. There's definitely some weird things, especially with some of the other apocryphal books as well, because you talk about like a cross that's walking around, and Simon Peter flying around. It's crazy. The apocryphal stuff is nuts, but there's probably some truth there. But read it with a grain of salt. So I think it's perfectly acceptable that Enoch is not in our canon. And that is, I think, something that as you're more mature, you can read, so you can chew the meat and spit the fat, spit the bones. So I hope look at that. So that's my thought. Talk about Palestine or Israel. I don't know in what context you're talking about. As far as people, I think there should be no violence. I don't agree with any fighting, any violence, if anything. And so I'm on the side of people not dying. So whatever side that is, ceasefires, peaceful agreements, people like Hamas, which Hamas literally is the word in ancient Hebrews for fear. It says Hamas, fear and violence. So I talk about this, a whole study, Genesis 6. The word, it says there's Hamas all over the whole earth, fear and violence. So the fact that the group is called Hamas, and not to say there's not other things. Anyway, there's a whole learning thing. You really understand your stuff. There's a whole thing, but I'm not going to get super political on that. You can look at the people, you can look at Ishmael and Isaac. That's a whole contradictory. That's a whole conversation to itself. Here's the deal. Israel is a people, it's a religion, it's a nationality, it's a location, it's a political group. Israel is many things. Same thing as Palestine. Palestine is a people. It's got religion incorporated into it. It's a people group. It's an ideology. There's so many things within it. So when you say the statement, right, even if you were to say you're pro-Palestine, you're pro-Israel, that doesn't mean you give them a blank check to do whatever they want, okay? So we all need to stand up for the injustices within both, right? If you are not standing up for the genocide on either side and speaking against it, then there's something wrong, right? Because you have to understand that we as people are not to be doing that. So here's the deal. And if you want to, we'll get into this. There's another peaceful religion, and I recommend not getting into this, because I'm very well versed with a peaceful religion's peaceful tactics, and we can talk about that. But as Christians or Jews, what we're supposed to do is we're supposed to love others. We're supposed to lay our lives down. We're not supposed to fight to get what we want. The Crusades were wrong. We condemn them 100%. But within other belief systems, they don't. So here's the deal. Let's just go into it. Let's talk about that, because you brought it up. So I'm wondering where you are on this. Do you know there's a whole idea, the Treaty of Al-Hudaybiyyah. I'm sorry, one. Hudaybiya. This is from a prophet with a capital letter M, who I'm going to just say, this guy couldn't win a war, and so he made a treaty with these guys. It was near Mecca, and basically said, "We're not going to fight you for 10 years." So they had the peace treaty. What did he do? Within 2 years, he believed that his God, starting with an A, said, "Hey, break your treaty, break your word, lie, and use violence and brutality to sneak up on them and beat them up and win the war." And because of this concept, it is a concept within this very peaceful religion that you can create treaties and break them as long as it advances your purpose. Same thing with this thing called taqiyya. It is a belief within this peaceful religion that as long as it advances your religion's belief systems, you can literally have your hand on your holy book, lie, straight up lie, say any lying, deceptive, deceiving thing you want at all, and you will be completely forgiven, and it's completely okay, because you are advancing the religion. In Christianity, that is absolutely not true. You know what? Within that, you can even deny your own religion. You can say that you're not of your religion. And so you're lying, you're bullying, you're breaking your word, you're breaking treaties, you're breaking laws, you're doing everything worldly, using worldly strength to advance your religion. And anyway, I don't know how I got on this topic. Within Christianity, you can't. You should not be doing that. You do not deny your faith. You do not lie, period. Not even to save your life, even to advance the kingdom. Okay? So there's so much there. It's completely different. The way that the two groups fight is completely different. I'm not taking a side because it's more complicated than that. But what I'm saying is how it's done should be with integrity, only truth, no lying, and no killing. But the problem is within these belief systems, within this peaceful system, they not only allow, they encourage killing. And I may have gotten to the killing verses because that's even more crazy. These violent verses and things like that that basically command you to subdue the whole earth by any means necessary. So within Christianity, if somebody that doesn't believe, that's okay. God will take care of it. You know, we're God's love. We're to share God's love. Within other belief systems, they're God's sword. They bring the judgment. We don't bring the judgment. We bring the love, and we do things so that God will supernaturally prove that He's supernatural God, and people will fall in love with Him. So anyway, that was a side issue, but I don't have any issue with the people group or with the location, things like that, though I think there's a lot of good arguments that that land is Israel's land and things like that. I'm not going to get in, but like I said, when I say Israel, it's not as simple as a state, because now that it's a state and now that there's all these things, it's just more complicated. It's just super complicated. And it's not black and white anymore. So anyway, I say that I hope that I answered your question. Probably didn't answer the way you wanted, just based off how you provided it. So we'll see how that looks. And like I said, we love all people. We love all people. So here we go. Let's see. Right, that's what I mean. I mean the doctrine. Yes, absolutely. So I'm sorry, this Sophius. I hope that heard you. Mario Scarfani says, "Amen." Singapore. Oh, welcome from Singapore. Scourge Ned says, on what day is the Sabbath? I think the Sabbath is traditionally observed from sundown Friday to sundown Saturday. I believe that's the traditional Sabbath Shabbat. This Disophius says, I disagree on the Deutero books were quoted by the early Christian church out of Greek or Septuagint. They quoted at 300 quotes. 80 quotes from the Apocrypha. Septuagint is Deuterocanonical books are not separated. For example, Nehemiah. Ezra, Nehemiah is one book. Judith, I actually really like Judith and Tobit. Like I said, so really the only argument here is I just don't know. The thing is, I just don't know. With a lot of those extra canonical books, I'm not convinced that they're authoritative. I think they're good. I think they're good to learn. And like I said, and I have my grandpa's Greek Orthodox book. I don't know where you are. If you understand, I remember I had Catholic friends that used to tell me, "Oh, you Protestants took out books of the Bible," and I was like, "Hold up," because I come from Orthodox. So how many books do you recognize? They said 73. They said, and you Protestants recognize 66. They hold up, hold up, because I come from Greek Orthodox. Guess how many books we have? 78. So who took out books now? So now the Catholics have an understanding that it's not that someone took out books, it's that they recognize a particular canon of a particular number. And then the Jewish Sefer has even more books, 82 maybe or something like that. I don't know, maybe more. And so it's just a matter of what are authoritative and what are extra. I think Maccabees is a great book. I think these books are great. I just don't see them as authoritative. And Yasan says, my friend calling me a T word because I support. No, I don't think supporting anything. I think it's your action. So I think this is what we were saying, Yasan, is it's hard for me to give a blank check to anyone and say do whatever they want. If you support a group, be able to call them out with the stuff they're doing wrong, whether it's Israel or Palestine or Ukraine or Russia or whatever. And all of those have a lot of black spots on their ledger, okay? And so the idea is you can support the cause, right? And the cause should be end violence, no killing, none of that stuff, right? That's the purpose. We want peace, right? But when you have people that are saying, I'll just say this real quick. I don't want to get political. I really don't want to get political. Say, hey, we can have peace as long as we divide it. We have a two-state solution. And they say, no peace unless we get what we want. Then you can't work with people like that. So the question is, so they're forcing your hand. It's kind of like they're giving you an ultimatum. And that's I believe that's not, and I get what you're saying, but ultimately, like, that's what has to be done. Things like that where people compromise. If people are not willing to compromise, then there's no point to do these things because the only option is violence. And if they're doing these ultimatum terms, then that's why you see the stuff. And that's why you see 70, there's a whole thing, by the way. We could get into that if you really want to. There's a lot of statistics that say that 77% of people within that peaceful religion support ISIS. And then 77% want Sharia law. 77%. So there's almost 2 billion of them. That's 1.4 billion people who support the things I just mentioned, right? Taqiyya and Hudabiyya, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, and the lying and all that stuff. They support it. They might not do it themselves, but they sit idly by and they don't say anything. So if you support the idea of whatever group in that area, I'm not one to tell you this, that, or the other. I think there's a lot of arguments based off one side because clearly I'm Christian, so clearly I'm going to support the side that I believe Israel has. But at the same time, here's what I'm saying is they're not doing that. They were under that group. You could live peaceably in that area. They said we'll have a separate state things. You can have your side, I can have my side. They're trying to make compromises and successions being reasonable, and the other side is not. As far as I've never heard a single one on that side say, it's okay, we'll do two states. It's okay, you can live with us, among us equally. No, it's never been that way. So I think you have to look at the situation and say, who's speaking in more peaceful terms? I understand there's black spots on both sides. Please, I don't want this to turn into a whole political thing. But when I look at the arguments of people, why did they call you that? Look at the history, look at what they're saying. And then the same thing is there's so much in the background of it that it's just too complicated. That's why I say it's too complicated. It's way too complicated to do. So Scourge Ned says, isn't it in the 10 Commandments not to lie? Yes, it's in the 10 Commandments not to lie. But like I said, go look at it. Look it up for yourself. Taqiyya, Taqiyya. And then Al-Hudabiyya. It's Al-Hudabiyya. There's so much. That's why people say, well, isn't the same God of Judaism and Christianity and Islam and Baha'i and Hindu and all? It's like, no, it's not the same because they're so different. And this is not gonna be a bashing of any other religion. I don't want to do that, but there's so much within that peaceful religion that I feel is contradictory within itself. It even says to listen to the people of the book and things like that, which would be us and the Jews. But then it says that the whole thing makes no sense to me. Sorry. I don't want to get on that rabbit trail, but yes, it's a commandment not to lie. But if your big capital A God tells you to lie to advance its agenda, then go ahead and lie. And I'm like, so is it or is it not? And then you can decide that based off yourself. Like, anyway, I don't want to get into that. We love our brothers and sisters of any religion and denomination across the board as fellow humans. We love them. We care for them. We want them to come to the knowledge of Jesus Christ. We want them to live in peace and not violence. And I'll just leave it right there. Even though we disagree, we love you. That's why I love when people who are Muslim or Hindu or atheist or whatever come and talk, because God's not afraid of questions and God wants to reason with you and work with you. Love God with all your heart, strength, and mind. So he welcomes whatever you guys have. He's not afraid of your questions. He's not afraid of what you might ask. He wants to love you guys, care for you, come into the kingdom with whatever that looks like. So, and he's extending it to you. He makes salvation available to all people. So anyway, I could keep going about that. I will hop off here. And I will jump on work. I stayed on a little longer than I wanted to, but that's how these are because I love them. Anyway, we're typically here. We're typically here from Monday, Tuesday, Friday, Saturday mornings. We typically do these live streams where we talk about a couple verses of the Bible or a topic, and then we go into questions and answers and prayer requests. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope that answered your questions. If you like these, please interact with them. Let the algorithm know they're good. I love these because they show people's feeds. So you're swiping, all of a sudden, boom, something about Jesus, something about God, something about faith is in your feed. So I really want these. This is why I do these as opposed to the other videos. So if you like them, interact with them. Let YouTube know you like them. And then I hope you guys have a great day and peace.